Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you who are taking valuable time out of your busy schedules to attend this first session of the Transformation, Revolution, Action and Commitment, or TRAC Forum for 2021. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Gary Thassera. I'm a technical advisor at the Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Center, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin our session today, I would like to take a minute to introduce the TRAC Forum. For your information, TRAC, TRAC stands for Transformation, Revolution, Action and Commitment, and it is a series of fora organized by the Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Center in collaboration and conjunction with the iGEM platform. TRAC Forum will be held twice a month, beginning in September of 2021 and continue until December of 2021. Each TRAC Forum for 2021 will introduce a varied suite of cutting-edge ideas to move Malaysia forward economically, socially, and politically. It is a unique forum where policymakers, academicians, industries, non-profit organizations, and youth will come together to discuss the direction that Malaysia should chart for the future of Malaysia and all Malaysians. The objectives of this forum are firstly, to create a platform for subject matter experts, policymakers, youth, NGOs, academicians, and industry players to discuss robust ideas on decisively moving Malaysia in a transformative fashion towards sustainability. And second, foster collaboration between all stakeholders to combat climate change through the implementation of green technology and innovation, and to encourage the Malaysian public and private sectors to participate fully in the green economy in Malaysia. This month, the TRAC Forum is proud to present transformation as our theme for September. Therefore, today's session 1, we will be opening the TRAC series with a forum entitled Sustainability, the Present and the Future. To elaborate their views on this topic, we have invited 4 outstanding subject matter experts on this topic. For today's forum, our first speaker is Ms. Nasha Chia Hui Lee. She is Environment Analyst for the Climate Change and Energy at the United Nations Development Programme, or UNDP, Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam. In the UNDP, she manages a portfolio of projects focusing on climate change, sustainable energy, low-carbon cities, and provide support to the implementation of Malaysia's climate commitments. She has experience in program management and policy research in the field of climate and energy, and has worked extensively with the national government in these areas. In former roles, she worked as a sustainability consultant, conducting environmental impact assessments for energy projects. Nasha graduated from the University of Oxford with a master's degree in environmental change and management, where she was a Commonwealth Scholar, and she holds a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from the University of Malaya. So without further ado, I would like Ms. Nasha Lee to deliver her presentation. Nasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gary, for the introduction. Just want to check if you can hear me and see my screen. Yeah, great. So today I'll be sharing on the topic of what makes a city sustainable. And I will be sharing on climate risk and impacts towards cities, but also in terms of big ideas that we can expect to look forward to in terms of sustainable cities, and also a framework to think about how we as a community, as a city, as a global citizen can progress towards sustainable cities. Now, why do we talk about cities? Cities are home to more than 50% of the world's population. And by 2050, this figure will rise to almost 70%. And most of the population growth will be coming from countries and regions such as Asia and Africa. And we will be expected to see an influx of population. And what that brings with it would be increased resource use, increased pressures on our environment and increase and also more products and services being flown through the pipeline. But cities also account for more than 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and most of them come from sectors of energy, transport, and buildings. At the same time, cities account for more than 60% of global energy use. Now, with the 21st century, it began with massive shocks like the financial crisis in 2008, to the climate breakdown, as we're seeing now, climate-induced natural disasters happening year after year. And as of last year, depending on who you look at, the statistics, it shows that last year was one of either the hottest year on record or the second hottest year on record. And since 2010, we've had 9 years of continuous record-breaking temperatures. And fast forward to today, where we have the COVID-19 pandemic that's raging shocks to all parts of our systems, from our economic systems to our health systems to our population. Now, these impacts are hitting people with sharp inequalities of income, and it's the poor that are the most vulnerable. And what all these three crises and the repeated crisis that's happening in the 21st century tells us is that we are deeply connected with each other and also with the rest of the living world. Now, these crises are emerging from the very systems that we've created. And for many, these shocks are simply an existential threat in the world. And it is our cities that face the brunt of these impacts. Now, how does a changing climate impact our cities? Cities, first of all, concentrate millions of people in locations that can be very highly vulnerable to disasters and to the impacts of climate change. We know that 21 out of 33 of the world's megacities are lying in low-lying coastal areas, and it's estimated that more than 700 million people worldwide live in areas that are located less than 10 meters above sea level. By 2050, more than 800 million urban residents could be faced with sea level rise and coastal flooding. And by 2050, also 1.6 billion people could be vulnerable to the impacts of chronic heat stress and extreme heat. So climate change impacts our cities in terms of 4 dimensions, which is livability and workability, food systems, physical and infrastructure assets, as well as natural capital. Now, in terms of livability and workability, we see that hazards like heat stress can affect the amount of time and the quality of our life, especially as we are working outdoors. And increased temperatures can also shift disease vectors and affect our public health systems. In terms of food systems, food production and food distribution lines can be affected by things like drought, floods that can affect lands and crops. And in terms of physical and infrastructure assets, things like buildings, roads, bridges can all be damaged or destroyed by floods, by forest fires. And the thing about physical and infrastructure assets is that there is an engineering threshold where once you pass that threshold, all sorts of catastrophe will occur. And lastly, in terms of natural capital, so climate change is shifting ecosystems and destroying forms of natural capital that we see in our cities today. So what this tells us is that our cities are deeply vulnerable to natural disasters and to climate impacts. But it also tells us that in order for us to really stand a chance in beating the climate crisis, we need to focus our efforts in cities. And by taking action in cities, it is estimated that we can reduce emissions by nearly 90% by 2050. So, since many of us live in cities and many of us will live in cities in the year to come, I think the key question to ask is what makes a city sustainable? And at its most basic form, a sustainable city comprises of a green and a resilient city. We can view it in terms of 2 dimensions. Green, in terms of the ecological footprint of the city, is contained. And green in the literal sense that we provide green spaces and places and open areas for community to live and enjoy their lives. And a resilient city is a city that's resilient against human-induced climate change, especially in the era of the Anthropocene, which is a geological age that's defined by human intervention with nature. And a resilient city helps prepare us for all sorts of hazards like extreme heat, flooding, drought, and wildfires, which according to McKinsey is the 4 top hazards affecting our cities today. So a sustainable city is really a city that prepares us for all sorts of shocks in the future and in the present. So moving on, we know that climate change is a huge issue that we are tackling today and also in the future. So what kind of big ideas can we propose? What kind of solutions can we implement to ensure that our future is sustainable and our cities are well protected? I'd like to start with the first idea, which is the 15-minute city. And the 15-minute city is basically a neighborhood where you can get all sorts of services. You are, within work. You can access your office, your, schools, parks, playgrounds, community spaces. You can access retail opportunities, and all within 15 minutes of walking, of cycling, or taking the public transport. Now, the 15-minute city is not a new concept. It's actually a concept that has been applied in quite a number of cities around the world, and it's really gaining traction because of, I guess, the idea that people really want to be close to where they spend most of their time at. So, at the center of the 15-minute city is the fact that urban form is compact and it minimizes urban sprawl, which, as we all know, is a big contributor for emissions. Now, this concept is a sharp contrast from the urban planning paradigms of the past, where we see residential areas being separated from commercial areas, from retail areas, and from recreational areas. And the 15-minute city really looks at mixed land use and mixed housing, and it promotes housing diversity, supporting a range of different income levels and also age groups. And with the 15-minute city, communities are vibrant, they're safe and inclusive, and the 15-minute city is also connected to public transport, jobs, and services within the region. So in essence, with this 15-minute city concept, our lives in the city become much more convenient and more sustainable, and it's really all about living local. So there are some cities that have already adopted 15-minute visions or parts of the 15-minute concept. For example, Barcelona. So Barcelona has this super blocks model, which is a neighborhood of around 9 blocks, and where traffic is restricted to major roads outside of the blocks. And what that tells us is that within the inside of the blocks, that creates open spaces for communities to mingle and interact with each other and for recreational purposes. And the aim is to reduce pollution from vehicles and give residents space and also relief from noise pollution. And basically the idea is to value pedestrians, cyclists, and high quality public spaces over cars or motor vehicles. Barcelona has implemented about 6 of the super blocks by now, and it's planned to do 503 potential super blocks, which in case that it is realized, journeys by public vehicle private vehicle would fall by about 230,000 a week. And in Paris, the 15-minute city was also key to a successful re-election campaign by its mayor, Mayor Anne Hidalgo. And the idea is to have every street to have a cycle lane by 2024, and essentially removing about 70% or 60,000 of on-street parking spots and replacing them with green spaces and playgrounds, and also increasing office space and co-working hubs in neighborhoods that do not have such facilities. In Paris also, the use of infrastructures and buildings outside of standard hours are expanded. So you can expect to see a school hosting recreational activities in the weekends. The second idea that I'd like to introduce is nature-based solutions for climate resilience. For many years, the story of cities has been isolated from nature. But now we are increasingly realizing that we need to harness the power of nature for sustainable cities. And nature-based solutions help us to meet our climate targets, but also act as shields against climate shocks. So what exactly are nature-based solutions? They include our trees, forests, wetlands, parks, green spaces, and green infrastructures like green roofs and green walls. Nature-based solutions provide a lot of benefits, as you can see on the diagram on the right. For example, they act as lungs in the cities, filtering out air, improving soil and water quality. They help keep our cities cool, minimize the urban heat island effects through the shadings that tree provides. It helps build resilience to climate change. And when nature-based solutions are integrated within green infrastructure in buildings, it also helps to lower energy costs. And the overall effect is that it creates jobs, reduces noise pollution, and also leads to happier and healthier citizens. Nature-based solutions have been in practice for many years, if not decades already. For example, if we look at China, China has implemented a sponge cities program. So, China has been, facing rapid urbanization for the last few decades and also overexploitation of their nature. And 641 out of around 650 of their large cities are regularly affected by problems of flooding. And so what the Chinese government decided to do was to implement this program where basically the city would act as a sponge. So concrete pavements are replaced with wetlands, green rooftops and green gardens are put in place to absorb stormwater and minimize the risk of flooding. By 2030, it is estimated that China would have about 600 cities that act as sponge cities. And closer to home, in our neighbor Singapore, Singapore has this government-led program called the Active, Beautiful and Clean Water Singapore, which naturalizes waterways to lower flood risk. So far, it has reduced the flood-prone area from 3,200 hectares to 32 hectares, which is a really big improvement, with savings of about $390 million in water costs annually. And the great thing about this Active, Beautiful, Clean Waters or ABC program is that it successfully encouraged communities to also be part of water conservation and to take ownership of Singapore's waterways and water bodies, with about 300 over partners, active partners adopting ABC water sites. And on the right, you can see urban forests in Italy. And this is a vertical forest in 2 residential tower blocks featuring trees, plants, and shrubs that absorbs 30 metric tons of carbon dioxide every year. So these kind of nature-based solutions, show us that nature can be a part of our city and can be really integrated into our city and give us ecosystem benefits that can help benefit the community as well. So the big idea number 3 is about reimagining mobility. Our current cities are really built on the idea of cars as a central driving force, or automobiles as a central driving force. And that leads to a lot of inherent structural waste. For example, in Europe, 92% of the time, an average car is just sitting there, parked somewhere. And it's only 5% of the time that the car is actually on the road. Another 1% of the time, the car is in traffic or finding a place to park. Now in Malaysia, we actually have one of the highest rates of private car ownership in the world, I think top 3. And we actually only need 60% of the current 5.8 million cars in KL to get the same amount of people to where they need to be going. So there's a lot of losses in this whole system. There's economic loss as well, where we have 3,100 ringgit per person per year in terms of economic loss incurred through traffic jams in Greater KL. And I think if you are a citizen or you live in KL, you probably understand what I mean. So this system is, it has losses and it's not a productive system. So the idea about reimagining mobility is really that mobility should be about moving people and not cars. There's two ways that we can do that. The first is on prioritizing mobility alternatives. And to do that, we need to, first of all, move people away from the, fossil fuel heavy form of transportation into other mobility alternatives. And policies can do wonders in terms of that. For example, time and demand-based congestion charges, strategies to guide investments away from highway expansions and towards retrofits for mobility alternatives that promote active form of transportation like walking or biking, and bans on fossil fuel transport. The second strategy is something that's really a future trend or a trend that we're seeing that is really going to be a stronghold of the future, which is electrification of personal vehicles, fleets, and public transit. A mix of things are required to do this. For example, policies and regulations like instituting a clean air zone, internal combustion engine phase outs, and enhancing vehicle emission standards are policies and regulations. And then also on sponsorship or financing subsidies, it will be to make EV purchases cheaper and to also, make charge point deployment a lot cheaper. And technology will be a main, technology development will be a main focus. And on the right, I think there's two case studies here, which I would like to also explain. In Singapore, actually, Singapore started in 1975 with its first form of a congestion pricing program. That's many, many years ago. And the area licensing scheme served a fee of 3 Singapore dollars on vehicles accessing the central business district during peak morning hours. To offer an alternative to that, Singapore drivers could park at the outskirts of the city and to take transit into the CBD for as little as 50 Singapore cents. So the program actually produced immediate results, increasing public transport ridership from 30% to 70% by the year 1983. And in the 1990s, this program was replaced by the electronic road pricing system, as we all know today, to expanded to include non-peak hours as well, that further improved the ridership and reducing traffic volume. Now, on the bottom right, you see a pop-up bike lane in Berlin. So pop-up bike lanes are temporary structures that are created to help facilitate active transport like biking. And this really boomed in the time of COVID. I think this is a picture from last year in Berlin, where people wanted to look for, wanted to shift their mode of transport from something that is more individual, where they would be less exposed to people with COVID, who potentially could have COVID. And so the pop-up bike lane was a trend that started and it kind of spread all across Europe, where, there would be temporary road markings and temporary cones where people can just block off one area of the road that was originally reserved for cars and to make them into bike lanes. And the great thing about this is that people are starting to see that pop-up bike lanes are a cheap solution or cheap retrofit to test out a potential bike lane. And because of that, it has mobilized cities like Paris and Barcelona to actually start expanding their bike lanes. I also like to share an example from Guangzhou Bus Rapid Transit, which I visited a couple of years ago. And the picture I took on the right is a picture of when the BRT had already been completed and was operational for a couple of years. The picture on the left is a picture of before the BRT, and you can see that there's just congestion everywhere and buses are just, struggling to pick up passengers, and it's not a very safe environment. But the Guangzhou BRT has one of the highest riderships in the world in terms of BRT, and also lots of really good benefits to provide to the entire ecosystems. In terms of carbon dioxide emissions removal, avoidance, it has avoided 84,000 tons of CO2 emissions per year. Travel times for motorists and bus riders have also improved by 20% and 29% respectively. And there's a 30% higher bus speed. So average time saving per person would be about 6.6 minutes per BRT trip. I think one of the most interesting things to see is also that all along the BRT corridor, there was a 50% increase in cycling because the Guangzhou government had also, at the same time, designed cycling infrastructure to complement this BRT. And so the result of it is just that the whole city's urban interface has changed, and people move much more efficiently between point A to point B. So the last big idea is on the circular economy. I think, when we talk about climate change or climate action in cities, a lot of the conversation is about how can we transform our energy systems to be much more renewable, to be more efficient. But at the flip side of it is this idea that products also release a lot of making and disposing of products also release a lot of emissions. And in order to meet our climate targets of zero emissions by 2050, we really need to be looking at a circular economy because that helps us to meet 45% of our goal. And in cities, I think these are some of the business models that can be applied to implement a circular economy. And I really like the examples here. So for example, circular supplies. This is the use of renewable energy or bio-based or recyclable input to replace toxic and single life cycle inputs. And companies like Google and L'Oreal are already doing this. If we see product life extension, so this is about making our products last much longer through reselling, repairing, remanufacturing, and upgrading. And then outdoor are, sports apparel company Patagonia has really offered a lot of value add in terms of people purchasing their products that they can help to repair, and also when you're done with the products, you can trade it in for a certain incentive. Not to forget the sharing platform. So the sharing platform actually, sharing economy helps us to dematerialize, which is something that is really needed in the circular economy because we want to keep materials flowing in the system for as long as possible and to minimize waste going into landfills. So sharing platform, things like Grab, for example, where you don't actually need a car to move from point A to point B. Spotify and Netflix, which, basically you can stream music and movies all you want without having to incur any material consumption at all. And also, lastly, I think product as a service is a business model that's up and coming, where instead of us as consumers going out to buy products and then having to deal with products that spoil or having to deal with disposing of products at the end of their life cycle, a product as a service offers product access. So we get the service without having to actually own that product. And companies like Philips are offering like lighting as a service, and companies like IKEA, they're offering furniture as a service. So I'd like to leave you with this one question. How can our city be a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet. So I think the answer to this question lies in a very simple diagram, or a donut even. And we need a new vision for progress fit for the century ahead of us. Our current vision for progress is really, unlimited growth, unlimited GDP increase. But we know now that this economic model just doesn't work in a time where we are put face to face with all sorts of different challenges, sustainability challenges. This donut economy is an economic model by an economist called Kate Raworth. And basically the goal is to leave nobody falling short in the hole in the middle of the donut. Falling short of the foundations of life, for example, health, education, gender equality, housing, and energy. Is to get everyone over the foundation and into the green area of the donut itself, but at the same time, don't overshoot the outering of the donut, which is the ecological challenge, ecological ceiling. And it's there that we put pressure on the life-supporting systems that support this planet. So here is a diagram of how much shortfall we are in terms of falling within the social foundation, and how much we have already overshot the planetary boundaries. So billions of people around the world are, in the area where they are falling short of social foundations. They don't have enough water, food. They don't have access to health and education. And the planetary boundaries at the outer ring are the 9 boundaries where Earth system scientists believe hold our habitable planet in balance. And we've already crossed 4 of them: climate change, biodiversity loss, land conversion, and nitrogen and phosphorus loading. So the aim of this donut economy concept is really to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet, which, if you look at it, is the definition of sustainability. It's the definition of sustainable cities. And so I would like to leave you with this one, with this one diagram here that I think provides a starting point for us to think holistically about how our cities can transition to be much more sustainable, resilient, and also low carbon. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nasha, for your informative and very interesting presentation, extremely comprehensive and covering the 4 big ideas, as well as the donut economy, which I thought was very, very interesting. Before I continue, I would like to invite all the listeners to, if you have questions, kindly put them in the question box, and they will be provided to the Secretariat, and the Secretariat will make them available to us. For your information, if you do not see a question box on your screen, just refresh your screen and the question box should appear. I note that we already have some questions, so I look forward to a good discussion later on. Moving on to our second speaker. Our second speaker this morning is MGTC's very own Puan Nor Hasliza Muhammad Mokhtar. Puan Hasliza, as we know her, joined the Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Center in 2001, when MGTC was still known as Pusat Tenaga Malaysia, or PTM. Currently, she is the Senior Director of Cities and Industry Division that focuses on providing consultancy and advisory services for states and local governments in transforming their cities into low-carbon cities and aligning themselves with the Low-Carbon Cities Framework and the National Low-Carbon Cities Master Plan. Puan Hasliza also works closely with the industries to advise and encourage them in the adoption of green technology, specifically in energy efficiency and energy management. In her more than 20 years of service, she's played a key role in various MGTC projects including energy audit grant for the industrial sector, the government green procurement or GGP project, My Hijau, and the ASEAN Energy Management Scheme, IMAS, the Energy Management Gold Standard. She has also led in the development of the Green Technology Master Plan, the green tax incentives, and the development of green initiatives at the state level, such as the Kedah Green Agenda and the Selangor Green Action Plan. She has assisted organizations to develop green roadmaps and action plans. Puan Rosliza has an MBA in Strategic Management from University of Technology Malaysia and a Bachelor of Business Administration from the International Islamic University Malaysia. She's an alumnus of the International Visitor Leadership Program of the U.S. Department of State's premier professional exchange program. So without any further delay, I would like to welcome Puan Rosliza to deliver her presentation. Puan Rosliza, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Gary. So we have listened to Nasha earlier. She talks about sustainable cities. So it is more on the global perspective and also how other countries are doing about these sustainable cities or low carbon cities. So for me, I'm going to talk more about the Malaysian perspective or what are the activities or programs that have been ongoing in Malaysia. So I'm going to talk about low carbon cities on accelerating towards a low carbon future. Okay, so this will be the contents of my presentation today. When we talk about the urbanization issues, it's happening all around the world. So including Malaysia. We can see that from the Department of Statistics of Malaysia, we can see that from 2010 until 2050, the percentage will be increased significantly. From 2010 it's about 71%, and it is expected by 2050 the urbanization in Malaysia will increase up to 88%. Why people move to the cities? Because one of the reasons is the promise of the jobs and job opportunities and prosperity are among the factors pull people to cities. So as mentioned by Nasha earlier, half of the global population already lives in the cities. And by 2050, it is expected that 2/3 of the world people are expected to live in the urban areas. So from there, what are the impacts of urbanization? You can see that when there are more people move to towns and cities, one of the major challenges in terms of the transport system, which there will be a traffic congestion. So among others are also about the air or noise pollution, due to the traffic and also the people around the cities, they will become worse, and then urban heat island. This is happened due to human activities, and also will increase the social problem in terms of crime, because more people they are desperate, so there will increase or there will create more social problem in the cities, and in terms of health and also access to resources, because the overpopulation and rapid population increase in most urban centers. The most common issue that have been raised is in terms of the the inadequate of sewage facilities, for example. Okay, so from there, why is it because of the urbanization issues? So it is very important in terms of the urban planning. Urban planning, or we call it as a town planning, is important due to the various challenges faced by the cities. So taking care about the demand of the people, need of physical spaces and infrastructure by sustainable manner. So the quality of built environment directly impacts the well-being of the people in the cities. So among the importance of why urban planning is important here is because we want to have an organized and planned development of cities. Yeah, it will offer better quality of life. Yeah, its economic growth and economic development, environmental sustainability, make cities resilient, as mentioned by Nasha earlier. Yeah, and then to give a better infrastructure in terms of sustainable form of development, and also easy access to education and health facilities, and we should provide a good and efficient public transport. Yeah, so more people can shift their mobility from private ownership to using the public transport. That is also our aim, because when we can see that in Malaysia, for example, every family at least will have at least 2 cars. Yeah, so this is quite common in Malaysia. So how we want to manage this as well? So a lot of cars on the road will also cause pollution, and also cities. That's why the urban planning is very important. And then efficient and reliable waste management system, and also more jobs and other economic opportunities. So from this urban planning, a more structured way, so it will overcome all these issues. Okay. And then why cities? Yeah, because we can see that cities have the power to change the world. Yeah, so ending for centuries, cities have been centers of commerce, culture, and innovation. So people, so all these critical crossroads in time, we need to, the idea that cities can create more than ever. Yeah, and then but cities are vulnerable as they are powerful. Yeah, because 70% of cities are already dealing with the effects of climate change. Yeah, and nearly at all risks. So over 90% of all urban areas are coastal, putting most cities on Earth at risk. Flooding, for example, from rising sea levels, and also powerful storms. So these are some of the climate change, or we can see nowadays, right? And then in terms of urban growth, shows no sign of slowing. Yeah, cities have become awesome in size, but also greenhouse gas emissions. So larger cities have a ravenous appetite for energy consuming, because energy consuming about the 2/3 of the world's energy from the cities, yeah, and creating over 70% of global CO2 emissions. Yeah. Okay, so we also mentioned in our Green Tech Master Plan that low carbon cities an important step towards creating a greener and more sustainable Malaysia, improving the quality of life for its residents as well as future generation. So this is why we need to tackle the issues in cities immediately. Okay, so we can see that from even the UN Habitat also mentioned that because of the problem is world cities are responsible up to 70% of greenhouse gas. Yeah, and then but there is a solution, so there is opportunity from there. So we can see that there are a great opportunity that we can do in the cities, how we can tackle all these issues, right? So we need to understand the contribution of cities to climate change, which will help to intervene at the local level. So with a better urban planning and greater citizen participation, we can make our hot cities cool again. So it is also our responsibilities how to make our cities more resilient, and we can live happily, right, for our future generation. Okay, so in terms of Malaysia's commitment in sustainable development, we have a few documents of policies and plans that we can also refer to. For example, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, which to meet the needs at the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. So here we can see that under SDG, there are 3 core elements, which is the economic growth, the social inclusion, and also environmental protection. So in Malaysia, we have several policies and documents that we can refer to. For example, our National Policy on Environment, even our National Green Technology Policy, which was launched in 2009. Same goes to our Climate Change Policy. And then we also have the National Urbanization Policy in 2019. And also we also have our Green Technology Master Plan, and another important document is the Third National Physical Plan. So, and then from here we can see that how the linkages of the existing policies with the implementation of low carbon cities in Malaysia. From here we can see that we have started our low carbon cities framework in 2011. And then recently, together with UNDP and also we call it a GTLCC project under SEDA, we have come up with the low carbon cities master plan. So we already launched this master plan on 13 July this year. So it's just recently. So this will be our direction and how Malaysia is going to implement or adopt the low carbon cities in Malaysia. Okay. So just an overview about this master plan. So our aim is to transform Malaysian cities into low carbon. Definitely that will be our aim. And there are three key drivers in this master plan, which is the governance and implementation framework, urban planning, and also community participation. We can see that these are some of the drivers that need to be emphasized. And then about the key enablers, there are also three key enablers, which is the funding and capacity building. And so data collection analysis, and also build environment and physical infrastructure. And to do this, there are three main things that we need to do is in terms of we will emphasize on the measurement, management, and also mitigation. So these are the three elements. So why are we talking about low carbon cities for Malaysia? So I think we all know that one of our Malaysia's commitment is to reduce GHG emission intensity of GDP by 45% by 2030 relative to intensity of GDP in 2005, the baseline. And then other than that is to promote green growth through green technology. So this initiative to enhance the environmental sustainability through green growth. And then to leverage on our rich biodiversity. So Malaysia is committed to maintain at least 50% of our forest and tree cover, and also to increase to make sure the carbon sequestration. And then, and the most important, another important element is that why we need a low carbon cities for Malaysia is that we want to maintain or to ensure the quality of life of our people. So we want to improve in terms of standard of living and also to ensure the high quality environment. Okay, what is LCCF or low carbon cities framework? So as I mentioned earlier that this LCCF was launched way back in 2011. So the target are the cities, especially the municipalities. We also encourage the developers and also universities to participate in this or to adopt this low carbon cities framework. So by this framework, the LCCF is to guide the stakeholders how to implement the low carbon cities effort. And then the target, it is also to support the 45% carbon emission intensity by 2030. Also, in terms of the objective of LCCF is to encourage and promote the concept of low carbon cities and township in Malaysia. So we want to have more cities to adopt this LCCF, and then to increase the compatibility of cities or township with their local natural system, and also to guide cities how to make the right decision towards a greener solution. Because we have green technology which also help, they can choose from there how to make their cities more greener. Okay, so this SLCF was launched, version 1 was launched in 2011, and we already improved the version to version 2, which was released in 2017. Okay, in terms of the key benefits of low carbon cities, so there are 5 key benefits, which is a clean, cool, healthy, livable, and vibrant. Yeah, this is the direct indirect benefits to the residents, businesses, as also the cities. So, for example, in terms of cleaner, so we can reduce air pollution from fossil fuel vehicles, and also contaminated waters, for example, that discharge into the rivers and waste goes to landfill. And then cooler cities, so we have high sequestration trees, for example, planted in the cities to reduce the urban heat island from there. And then we want to have a more green buildings in the cities, and then to create more healthy environment, so we can reduce the pollution and contamination, and also to increase the outdoor activities, so it is more comfortable for people to cycle or to walk in the cities, and then we will create a more livable and then vibrant for people. So with the good infrastructure and numbers of ingredients of cities looking to grow and develop to improve in terms of the amenities and so on. So for LCCF, we have 4 main elements, which is the urban environment, buildings, urban infrastructure, and also urban transportation. So we have 15 performance criteria and also 41 sub-criteria. So among the example of urban environment, we look at the site selection, the greenery and environmental quality. So in terms of building, we look at the sustainable energy management system at the buildings, and then we create more low carbon buildings. And also in terms of infrastructure, we look at the waste, energy and water management, and urban transportation. So we want to shift the private to public transport, so that we can reduce the use of private motorized on the road, right? And then another important thing is that in terms of the utilization of transit-oriented development approach or TOD. So in order to accelerate the low carbon cities initiative, MGTC together with CASA also introduced or launched our program called Low Carbon Cities 2030 Challenge in 2019. So because we can see that the slow response and also some so in order to accelerate the transformation towards these low carbon cities, so we hope that with this LCC 2030 challenge, more cities will participate in our program. So how is this program will contribute towards that aim, or our goal is that we want to establish more low carbon zones in state and also major urban areas especially. So for this LCC 20 challenge, other than local authorities, they can also universities, economic zones, and so companies can also participate in this program. For example, for companies, they can be a part of low carbon partners. So because for low carbon zones, the eligibility is for those municipalities or the areas must more than 50 hectares. So it is more, it is to create a bigger space. So to create more zones. So our target is that by 2030, we will create about, we need, our aims to have about 200 low carbon zones. And then 1,000 low carbon partners by 2030. And then in terms of the reduction, what are the elements of this LCC challenge or LCC 2030 challenge? So there are 5 elements that we are look into, which is the first one is on the energy. Yeah, so we encourage the cities or the participants to maximize in terms of energy efficiency and also to increase the adoption of renewable energy. Yeah, and then mobility, to increase the use of public transport. Yeah, and then waste, water, and also to increase the carbon sequestration is from the greenery. So need to maintain or increase the number of trees and green spaces in the city. Yeah. So in terms of examples, I think we have clearer picture, which Nasha already presented just now, how other cities are doing all the initiatives towards this low carbon. Okay, so these are some of updates of our low carbon cities challenge. Yeah, so as of now, we have about 24 low carbon zones. So and then 45 low carbon partners. So this involve about 64 PBTs that have been trained in low carbon cities framework. Yeah? And then as of 2020, it's about 148,572 tons CO2 reduction have been achieved so far. So these are some of the local authorities that already received the diamond recognition from this LCC 2030 challenge. So for this year, we open up all for applications until end of October. So in November, we'll do the audit or the assessment for those applicants that want to participate in our LCC 2030 challenge. Yeah. Okay, so way forward, how we want to imagine, we want to the transition towards our low carbon cities. So the transitioning of our city from a carbon-based economy to a sustainable one is not an easy task, as we know that it takes a tremendous efforts, yeah, from various stakeholders, yeah, to be with us to position our Malaysian cities in the forefront of low carbon cities development. So in order for so as I mentioned earlier, we want to have cities that is livable, healthier for people to live. Yeah, so these are the 4 main elements that we are emphasized. So this is how we can imagine, yeah, for a low carbon city. So we have a very energy efficient or low carbon buildings, yeah. So we have a lesser traffic congestion, for example, yeah, and then we can improve our standard of living. And then more spaces, more green spaces or green connectors in the cities, and we can see there are more electric vehicles or energy efficient vehicles in the cities. So I think. This is still a long way to go for low carbon city in Malaysia, but at least we are progressing. Yeah, because we believe that with our national low carbon cities master plan, so for the first phase, we are targeting about 33 cities. Yeah, that we will try to assist them to achieve certain targets towards low carbon cities or in 2050. Yeah, so we hope that more cities will participate in this program. Yeah, so out of now we have about 154 cities in the country. So with all these activities that we have, we hope that more cities, more developers, and also economic corridors will also participate. Even the universities also can participate in our low carbon cities program. Yeah, I think that's all from me, Dr. Gary. So I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Puan Hasliza, for your very comprehensive review of the LCCF and in particular the idea of having low carbon zones, low carbon partners, and your activities with local governments. And I think very interesting also the amount of emissions reductions that we've achieved so far through that. It's an important part of the tracking. Before we go to our next speaker, I'd like to once again encourage those listening to put your questions in the question box. Once again, if you can't see the question box, simply refresh your screen and the question box should appear. We already have some questions in, but we won't deal with them now. We'll deal with them during the Q&A session. Just another request, if you could also identify yourself in your question, as well as your affiliation. I think it would help the panelists to answer the question if they knew better what your affiliation was. I think it helps immensely in providing some context for the question. So once again, kindly identify yourself and your affiliation. All right. So thank you once again, Puan Nozliza. Moving on to the next speaker today. Our next speaker unfortunately can't be with us in person, and so he has provided a video of his presentation. The speaker is Dr. Karl Wagner. Dr. Karl Wagner, with his dedication to sustainability, has earned the nickname Mr. Greenheart. After years in the industry, he worked as a professor and a consultant at the University of Applied Sciences in Rosenheim, Germany. And since 1998, Dr. Wagner has received wide international exposure and has built a reputation in management and green technology, especially in Malaysia and Singapore, where he is the creator of the Triple Green Mock-up Building Park to research the tropical adaptation of passive design and smart technology in Kuala Lumpur. In addition, he's a member of the globally established ZEMCH, or Zero Energy Mass Customized Homes Committee. He has dedicated his work to the development of the tropical thermal ventilator, which was rolled out in 2011, with numerous experiments and prototypes for fresh air supply, mainly in residential buildings, to reduce carbon emissions and to bring about better and more affordable thermal comfort than air conditioners are able to accomplish. As a professor at the business school at the University of Kuala Lumpur, he was also involved in entrepreneurial research on leadership, team building, and change management. And with that, I would like to invite the Secretariat to play the video of Prof. Wagner's presentation.
Good morning, good afternoon. I guess it's early morning in your country. In my country, in Germany, it's late in the evening. I'm happy to be with you this morning to share with you a few slides about sustainable cities and townships and the application of the 3 pillars of Triple Green, which is in line with the United Nations Triple Bottom Line, which is a very old tool, but it is not really applied for buildings yet. And let's take the case study of Malaysia. You will see there are a lot of things in common. First of all, let me show you the slide that comes from the organizer, where you also want to implement green initiatives and help the communities to lessen their carbon footprints. If you want to do so, then you need to do it the other way around. You need to talk about the economy, society, and the environment as the 3 strategic threads of Triple Green in order to do it rightly. Okay, I'm going to go briefly to some of the introductions here. When we talk about these 3 pillars of the years to come, environment, society, and economy, I would like to highlight that now we come to the level of compelling targets for the environment. It is clear to see now that it is very difficult to achieve targets without a clear compass. And the compass is set by the way how we can build environmental friendly, as the environment costs about 1/3 of the carbon footprint. I could ask you this interactively, but now as I'm here, I'm just telling you the stories. Okay. Secondly, the society, well, we will also ask ourselves, why must I be environmental friendly? Is there anything in for us? And I think it is a fair thing to say that we will gain more thermal comfort and more indoor air quality. This is the meaning of IAQ. So you can see there are two angles of the triple green triangle later on, which makes sense. Because if you just have compelling targets which are echoing in saving CO2s by less air condition, for example, in the building sector, how is it for me in my house where I'm going to suffer, or how is it going to happen? The third one is the most neglected one, which is the economy. Here we're looking into the affordability. We call it, as you know, capital expenditures, what I need to spend for the building to come, and operational expenditures, including the paybacks. If you divide CAPEX and OPEX, you get reasonable paybacks, and they should not exceed 5 to 7 years. Otherwise, people will not be willing to purchase this kind of property. Let's see whether we can get it. We have to look into, you can read yourself from the slide, in a new tropical understanding for buildings of the UN's triple bottom line with a labeling scheme. You can see our friend Egon on the right upper corner of this slide, which will be there as our companion, because actually all three pillars should be indicated in A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, like the school marks, like the green labeling that you know from products. In my country, you go to any building, public building, and then you will see this kind of labeling. How strong is the building in terms of the environment, at least? So that's all that we have. Okay, then I would like to propose, just in a nutshell, to look into the triple green again. Single green, with the buildings that I propose, will have 80% less carbon footprints as conventional houses. That's a big promise. Let's see whether we can keep it. And briefly, I would like to mention that people were thinking, what is the tropical residential thermal comfort line? And I would say that the TRTC, as part of the indoor air quality, can be as high as 28.6 degrees Celsius. Researchers from UTM, from UITM have found that out. That's the benchmark. If you have proper ventilation on your skin, you will not feel so hot rather than without. If you have the normal standards, then the benchmark, the highest temperature you can take for society for ethical reasons is 26.1 degrees Celsius. Of course, in a country which is hot, the highest temperature we can stand is the most environmental friendly one and the most economic one. But is it also in line with our TRTC, our residential thermal comfort that we can endure in our houses? This is what the ASHRAE has asked themselves for many years, and they came up with the standards of 21.6 degrees Celsius. Since I was in Malaysia, I have added on the Malaysian way how to look into temperatures, and I came to the same figure without sweating. If you have ventilation, you will feel still comfortable with 28.6. If you don't, then the temperature should not be higher than 26.1 degrees Celsius. Finally, then I think I take a little breath, is the triple green meaning. As you can see, that the first one is not a spelling error. The 80% less carbon footprint of the single environmental related triple green aspect also goes into the 80% less carbon footprint for economy, because it's the operational expenses. the less carbon footprint we spend, the less costly it is for the person who is the landlord. So the first figure, which is not longer a secret, since I was the landlord of these small mock-up buildings that we built in Gombak, I know that we have spent about 16% more into the capex, into the capital expenditures, than for a conventional house that we also built with the generous sponsorship of CIDB. And we gained affordability. For 16% will pay off if the carbon footprint is 80% pretty soon. And we are only thinking about standard houses. We're not thinking about all these mansions, which are architecturally proper, but cannot exactly cater for the expenses that will be, of course, much higher. In Germany, all these proper passive houses, the technology that I will refer back to later, some of them have a payback period of about 30 years. And I think that's pretty long and awful. And since we have standard houses, it's going to be pretty much sooner. Okay. Let me just give you the onset of the structure that has been mentioned already due to the time constraints that we have. I've already touched the introduction on triple green in a nutshell. I could go deeper, but I would love to spend some more time with you to talk about the passive house, which could be adapted to tropical climates. Not about passive design, it's about the house as a whole, as an entire building that we're looking at, followed by the methodology that goes without saying. We're measuring temperatures, humidity, and all other things up to PM 2.5. That's what we measured in a 5-year study between 2014 and 2019. The windows are the most vulnerable part of almost all houses. That's why I will also show you one slide on the windows. And finally, how can we build more wisely and renovate to make it triple green? Without further ado, I think we would go right away to the literature review. Break.
Okay, Prof. Take a break.
Yes, short break only.
Yes, can
Just go to the slides.
No problem. Take as much as you have time you need. Take it.
Yeah.
I'll be here
Okay.
waiting.
I know. We will get it done now.
Yeah.
Just give me a second and we can record again.
Yes, no problem. So far, the posture and the speech is good. Yeah, better than the previous one. Yes.
Thumbs up.
Great.
How many minutes have you used up already?
Your session can be 15 to 20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay. Then I will have to rush a bit.
Yeah. You have around, let me see. Started 4, 5. You have around 12 minutes, something like that.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's fine. I try to finish it on time. I will have to skip a few things.
All right.
Okay, now we can go. You can say 1, 2, 3, then I'm ready to go to the screen.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, you ready? Okay. Okay.
Go.
Okay. In count of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Record.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the literature review. There are a lot of things I could tell you about the passive house, which is saving up to 80% of the energy. What you can see here is that heating, we save 90%. That's cheaper than cooling, but cooling at least we can save 80% of the energy. A passive house is not a passive design, as I mentioned that earlier, but it consists of the implementation of the following 5 pillars. And you can see them one by one. Some of them have to be tropically adapted, and I will just, so to speak, present tropically adapted and the pillars as well. The experts among you know that a passive house is fully insulated. There is no more air leakages. There's no more thermal bridge. There's only an indoor climate which separates the inside from the outside, even in our privacy. And you say, oh my God, I'll be sweating like hell. The answer is that comes from the Passive House Institute in Darmstadt near Frankfurt, where I collaborate with, is that the passive house has insulation. It has very good windows, but most importantly for tropical countries, I believe, is shading. What the passive house people have added on here already. Airtightness, as I mentioned. Then we see number 4, maybe astonishingly for you, mechanical ventilations, which are not inside the air condition. So especially they breathe in cooler air during the nighttime in some areas. It can go down to Kuala Lumpur. I have done a lot of experiments with that. It's working if you're not too particular with your thermal comfort in your residential area, and stand with 28 point something with ventilation blowing onto you, then this ventilation unit is good. What the passive house people want, they want to have heat and humidity recovery, and they are minimizing the flow of the air, but they have at least fresh air, so there's no problem of having too less air or even too suffocating from high CO levels. No thermal bridges, so just make sure everything is watertight and airtight, especially because there are some layers which are protecting this building from things from trickling in from outside to inside, and of course also the tropical climate in a way. But by ventilation, we still can get the best of both worlds. I will not now elaborate more on these things, that the insulation has to be double as thick as normal, or we use 10 centimeter fiber material. We have even done experiments with palm oil fiber material made in Malaysia as the market leader together with Indonesia. And some of the things have to be slightly adapted because of the low temperature difference. This is something I could explain to you later. And the other things about the measurement of passive houses, I think is not the time here. Let us just move quickly to the methodology where we took the GBP, a green passive building, which has the same shape and the same air volume as the RB. We call it the conventional red building. And don't worry about it. A red building is good because it can be greener in the future. Whereas a green building is already a green building, so no need to talk about it so much. Even so, I need to talk about it because it's not so common in the country. So welcome to BMI, to Gombak, where I had about 200 students all over 5 years who were measuring all these things. But if you want to know more about the experiments where our sponsors came with walls, they came with ceilings, they came with roofs, they came with windows, and all of them were made in Malaysia, or they were sold in Malaysia. And if you want anything to test on the buildings, if it's a new coating or whatever, then please let us know. And then I can open the door to Gombak BMI, British Malaysian Institute, to continue these kind of experiments that I think are vital and very important for the tropical adaptation of green buildings. Based on the passive house knowledge, we have sealed the buildings, except the one that you see on the right-hand side. That's our contrast building, the red building. Here we have also tested closed close window, open windows, and things like that. And then we have compared with the other buildings on the left-hand side. Okay, I think you will get the slides. I will share them with you. Then you can read in particular what divides the mock-up passive buildings, the GPB, from the RB. I have mentioned most of the things. Of course, for the green building, we're using solar panels for LED lighting, because here's not much to do in this small building. It's just like an ordinary room, and with 4 different demarcations towards the outside. So you don't need much electricity. And solar panels can easily also give the energy for the ventilation, which is a cross ventilation. Ventilation, by the way, is also borrowed from the kampung style. Long time ago, the kampung farmers, they had open door style all day and especially all night long, because they knew it's cool. Nowadays, we're not doing this because of the mosquitoes, but there are ways how to protect yourself, especially if you have mechanical ventilation. Okay, I will explain the rest to you downwards when it comes to the results. Here you can see some of my students here, Unique KL students, very proud to have them over these 5 years and to do all these kind of experiments. Finally, I come to the results and then to the conclusion. I will just show you 2 slides that you can see the magnitude of all these things that we have done, but I can't show you more in detail. As you can see on the right-hand side in the bottom, these are the ordinary windows, the single glazing, and the passive building will in Germany use at least triple glazing. We believe it's not necessary in a tropical country, even though we can get in some arguments, just because the temperature differential is not 30 degrees Celsius with minus that you have to fight with. You have to fight with 35 degrees Celsius, 25 degrees Celsius is not a big issue. Therefore, double glazing is good enough. In some instances, we even have proposed to use shutter boards. I will show you in the next slides in order to get away from the daylight heat. Here we could spend hours to explain all the statistical framework of these 7 days. For example, study that we did among all 300 days altogether that we have checked throughout these 5 years. And you can see on the right-hand side immediately that the RB, the residential building windows with the inner surface temperature that we measured, is pretty much higher than for the windows for the PB. You can also see that the USL, the upper space limit of 28.6 degrees Celsius, is not yet satisfactory when you compare the PB and the RB. Both of them are exceeding a lot, and therefore we are not really proposing to have windows, and windows will make it much, much more expensive. Okay, so let me just skip a few things and all these statistical things so you can see again the green building here in the green line is better than the red building, where the daytime will exceed much higher on these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. Some of them are a little bit hotter, a little bit cooler, more clouds, less clouds. There was not a single rain to be seen on these days. Therefore, we can say for certain that this is already on the way to be a empirical stuff for follow-up experiments, which can be more longer and can help the society to come back to the best way to keep the heat out. The mean score, you can see below, is 2 degrees Celsius lower, but it doesn't help. It's still too high. The most important thing is the ambient temperature that you see in the center of this slide here. Ambient maximum temperature, passive building 32, red building 34. This is not exactly what we wanted. So the windows distributors from Germany who came with their windows. They didn't leave exactly the site disappointed, but at least we could show that it doesn't work. It doesn't even work with sun protection. We put the tinted film on, and this is exactly what happened after putting on the tinted film. Any other solution may be quite expensive. I think a lot of things to discuss here, but I go to the final idea. The better green solution, therefore, because we can't get the temperature that we want in an airtight passive house with a ventilation, is the shutter. The shutter technology that comes from Orang Kampung again, and many other cultures in the world have that. I have set it up myself in my own Taman house about 5 years ago, when you can see that the whole area is fully shaded. Nowadays, smart shading was checked by Hagag in 2016. The future must be, of course, the other way around. We shade from top to the down, but it must be exactly the other way around. There are smart systems, of course, with external blinds that automatically close, and you can see how this is in a real house in Germany. The left-hand side window is fully closed, and the right one is moving from down to up because the sun leaves first at the downward position. Let me come to the last slide. So the conclusion is a bit simple and straightforward, but we don't have too much time to lose. You can check yourself on the CapEx, the capital expenditures. Now we come to the economic part. You can see that the GPB that we built was 21,000 ringgit, and the RB about 18,800. So the difference is about 16%. 3 positions. The green building has higher costs is for the walls. Of course, they must be more less permeable for the heat. The windows, of course, will cost more, triple the price. That's a lot. And we are also using solar DC. That's why we spend a little bit more money for the capital expenditures. If you look into the OPEX, that looks even more complicated to explain in this short period of time. On the left-hand side, you see heat gains and heat losses, which should be balanced in a conventional house. 600 kilowatt. If you take the professional passive house, which is in the second two graphs, you can see that that electricity is about energy is about 9.37% of the normal house, and the houses that we build is about 200 kilowatt hours on the right-hand side, and we still consume about 33%, but at least we come down. If you build it very professionally, like the passive house people would propose, we would save more energy, but the cost will be slightly higher. I don't think it will be exorbitantly higher. This one is the same. I have said that before, that the payback period will be about 5.5 years if we build it the Malaysian way, as we did, and not the excellent professional way like in Germany. New buildings, that's my final slide, at least for residential areas, reduce the WWW so you can, in order as much as you can, in order not to be exposed to the sun's radiation. Use more shading devices, affordable shading devices. It looks like kampung style. It looks a little bit more colorful rather than looking into high rises where everybody is looking at the same front. It's not always the case, I know that, but as a rule of thumb, here you can see one building where the window walls ratio is good, because it's not as putting the most vulnerable parts of a building in front, like the glass windows. We learned that also from townships like in Sana'a in Yemen, where they have shading and they have all these kind of small portions of the windows. Existing buildings is also something you can do in order to run away from the heat. You can even have indoor shadings. It's not bad, but it is not enough because it is still heating up the windows themselves. And there you need to think twice. All of our results are laid out in our 350 pages comprising report to be published as an ebook on my own website. And soon as a hardcover, there's a discussion with UITM Press, and my partner, she is Siti Fatiha Saleh. She was doing this research with me. And if you want to get in touch with a German or with a Malaysian, you can do so here, and we are happy to serve you further. So the summary is everything is said and done. And thanks for your attention, and have a fruitful onwards discussion in the further sessions.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Dr. Karl Wagner's very informative presentation on both the 3 pillars as well as the passive house. If you have any questions for Prof on these issues, of course, he's not here with us. It was a recording, but do feel free to provide us with your questions anyway, and we will be happy to convey these questions to him and reply to you in writing. So on to our final presenter for today. Allow me to introduce Mr. Ravi Krishnaswamy. Mr. Krishnaswamy is Senior Vice President for Energy, Sustainability and Industrial sectors for Frost & Sullivan, and he oversees operations in the Asia Pacific. Mr. Krishnaswamy has over 20 years of experience across the energy and environment industry, covering a wide range of sectors, multiple geographies, and leveraging long-standing working relationships with leading industrial players. His areas of expertise include power, utilities, clean energy, environment and sustainability, buildings and construction, Industry 4.0, as well as manufacturing. He's been a global leader and industry thought leader for energy and environment practices at Frost & Sullivan. He has delivered keynote addresses in more than 50 industry conferences globally and receives frequent mentions in international media, including CNBC, Bloomberg, and the New York Times. In addition, he's managed multi-million-dollar power infrastructure projects for Doosan Babcock and ABB. Mr. Krishnaswamy has a Bachelor of Engineering from the National Institute of Technology in Durgapur, India, and has done postgraduate work in strategic management at the Chartered Management Institute in the UK. Mr. Krishnaswamy, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gary. It's a pleasure and it's an honor for me to be presenting in this virtual forum, IGEM 2021. Can I request to move to the next slide, please? Yeah, maybe you can skip this. Yes, please. Yeah, thanks. So actually, when we ended last year, I would say it's pretty much gloom and doom because it is not a year anybody wants to remember, 2020, right? But as we stepped into 2021, there was a lot of optimism on the healthcare front. Obviously, vaccines were being rolled out. Also, regarding climate change, regarding sustainability, we had, I would say, a mixed bag of messages as we kind of began the year. There were concerns how COVID had impacted the investments into sustainability and renewable energy. Are people even interested? Do they have appetite to invest more? But clearly what we see is this is a kind of an eye-opener for for countries, companies, and even individuals, that I think they need to really respect the climate, respect the kind of science behind that, and also build back better. I think that's a kind of message we're hearing, not just from the US, I would say from many governments and many companies. And of course, the IPCC report, which was released back in June, I guess, was quite damning in terms of the kind of future in store for us if we do not act now. So what we see is clearly there are a lot of, I would say, messaging, positive messaging, but also there are some roadblocks. So if you look at recently the concluded summit meeting between the climate czar of the US, John Kerry, and also his counterpart in the China, clearly I think they could not reach any conclusive agreement. I think it's a matter of concern because the world's top two politicians have really not been able to conclude anything significant leading up to COP26 in November. So it's a matter of concern, and then especially when you think that I think China is also trying to build 200 gigawatt of coal power, not just China, I would say India, Indonesia, a lot of our Asian neighbors are in a kind of state of transition. And it's a difficult transition for many of these countries because they have a lot of legacy assets, I think, that need to be transformed. So from that point of view, I think if you look at this message, one of the recent, I would say, discussions where Christine Lagarde had with the founder of World Economic Forum, clearly she says, I think monetary policy is going to play a big role in terms of fighting the climate change. While there is science, there is technology, also it's about monetary policy. So with that, can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, okay. So what do we see are some of the big trends in the energy environment space? Clearly, as all of us understand, I think this energy industry is in transition towards decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization. I think one I would say very encouraging sign I see in the last several years, and especially in the last year or so, is several countries. I would say most of the major economies have pinned a net zero target. Whether it is 2040, which Korea has announced, I guess 2050, many countries, including the US, 2060, China. It's long way. Yes, I think it's not here. I think 2050 is 30 years away, clearly. But yes, I think we have targets and countries are working towards that. And also I think the kind of economics of renewable energy and the sustainable technologies are coming down so much with adoption and also with digitalization. We believe, I think it's possible for countries and industries and organizations to achieve it much earlier. So what you see in this slide is a kind of combination of those technologies and industry trends, which will, I would say, make us achieve or move towards a net zero world sooner than what all of us kind of anticipate. So digitization is all about, I think, leveraging real-time data, big data, sensors, etc., to kind of make decisions, to make energy savings, to kind of provide better comforts to individuals at a much lower cost and much lower carbon footprint. And I think, again, circular economy and a lot of these, I would say, trends kind of tie into that. Couple of things I would like to kind of mention before I move on to the next slide. One is about hydrogen. I think if you really see the last year, there has been so many, I would say, announcements and initiatives, conferences specifically on hydrogen. The question I get asked all the time is what is in it for the Asian region, especially this part of the world, the Southeast Asian region? Are we ready? Can we afford? I think clearly, I would like to kind of start by saying that more than, I would say, half of I think the countries account for world's GDP already have an announced hydrogen plans in place. Even closer to our region, I think Singapore has announced about $49 million for supporting hydrogen. Japan spends about close to $500 million in terms of budgetary support and also developing a lot of the entire value chain of hydrogen. Malaysia, especially Sarawak Energy, is quite active in terms of developing, I would say, a small-scale hydrogen generation plant, but again, having an ambition to be a regional player. So what is important in this region is no country is big enough to do hydrogen on their own. So clearly, I think for Southeast Asia, the message is the countries and the companies, the organizations in respective countries, the leaders in respective countries like Petronas, TNB, we talk about the SLNG in Singapore, talk about Sarawak Energy, PTT. I think these companies and also the large end users have to kind of go together. They kind of had to adapt a regional strategy. And that probably works better. And that's what we've seen in Europe. I think Europe has got a very ambitious plan. We also see European companies, especially, have a much larger cross-country footprint when compared to the ASEAN companies. So I think that's where we have an issue here. So I hope that the companies can come together to kind of push the envelope on hydrogen, because we have fantastic reserves of renewable energy, be it large hydro, be it, I would say, wind and solar in many places. And we have some of the, I would say, jewels in terms of large national oil companies. Just that it's a matter of how do you kind of leverage your respective strengths and move into the hydrogen economy. So that's on the hydrogen side. Again, I know, I think buildings is an important topic in this forum. And clearly, a lot of other speakers have spoken about buildings. Maybe I'm not going to spend a lot of time on buildings. But clearly, I think what we see is there are a lot of good reasons for this whole cognitive building, smart building to really take on. And I think today, in fact, I was seeing in the newspaper in Singapore, I think they've announced that the green building is not so much about the operational aspect of the building. It's all the way from the design, engineering, construction, and up to the end of the life, especially the demolition. So the green building certification is expanding in its, I would say, ambit, not just focused on the energy efficiency and operational aspects, but clearly to include the whole circular economy aspect. So what you see is a lot of these trends are interconnected. They're not isolated, they're not standalone, they're all interconnected. And then this is where the big push towards sustainability is going to be. And last but not least is about electrification. Clearly, I think that, again, the EV has caught on, I would say, quite well. And in fact, a few weeks back, BMW announced a very ambitious target of 50% vehicles to be all electric by 2030, all their new production. And again, I see many countries are taking steps to phase out diesel and petrol vehicles between 2030 and 2040. So I think we are, I would say, really in these excited times that we are kind of being part of this huge transition across sectors, which probably will lead us to a much sustainable ecosystem. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so now let me kind of touch upon some of the, I would say, trends that we see, which will be energy transition, sustainability, circular economy, smart and cognitive buildings, electrification, and then also talk about some of the new business models. Can we move on, please? Yeah. Okay, so I did mention early this year, we had concerns about the investment and appetite to invest in renewable. So clearly, I think the message, what we have now is the investments in renewable energy is very, very resilient. In fact, I think this is a projection we did early part of the year, and we're not done an update yet. So I'm hoping that when we reach end of the year, the projections for the subsequent year and for the current year, and also for the compounded growth rate for the next 4 years, we believe this will be much higher than even the 2.1% you see here. Clearly, because a lot of the stimulus money and also, I would say, investments from many of the large organizations are clearly going into renewables, whether it's offshore wind or large-scale PV, even rooftop solar. And I think this is being again aided by some of the largest, I would say, energy consumers like data centers. Clearly, I think most of the data centers have a very, very strong ambition to kind of be completely green, completely fossil-free. Even we see recently China cracking down on the kind of crypto mining entities which are using coal or gas. So I think it's a very encouraging signs we see, and I think the expectation is that I think the market will grow much faster than what even predicted beginning of the year. And this is a trend we're seeing across most major regions of the world. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. So some numbers to kind of take away. Wind, about 77 gigawatt of new capacity is likely to come online this year, which is matching last year's number. For solar, about 135 gigawatt is likely to be added in 2021, which is about 20% of the global installed capacity as of last year. So see, imagine in a kind of post-pandemic and post-recession year, we're adding 20% of the current installed capacity. So that's a phenomenal achievement, I would say, for the industry. And that kind of reflects the policies, the kind of affordable price point of these technologies. In many cases, they are on par with the grid power. And also, I would say, the kind of the supply chain and the ecosystem development, which has made it possible to even reach these solar panels plus batteries, I would say, to remotest parts of the world. So clearly, I think that's a big game changer, I would say, these encouraging developments. I think the next one is few other fossil-related trends, clearly decline of coal, expecting about 33 gigawatt of coal plants to be closed this year, and about less than 50 gigawatt of gas will be added this year. The gas will continue to be a bridging fuel because we don't have a solid baseload technology yet till hydrogen comes online or becomes affordable. So we believe, I think, gas will continue to be that fuel. But even that is kind of, I would say, plateauing. Nuclear, I think there are obviously pockets of the world where nuclear will still continue to be of interest. And even in the US, after 25 years, we see a reactor coming online this year. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so globally, what we see is clearly the stimulus money from the US, from the European governments, from Japan, I would say from many of the, I would say G7 and G20 countries, a significant chunk of it is flowing towards infrastructure building on a more green and sustainable manner. And renewable energy obviously stands to gain from that. So that's what we're seeing across the world. And also, I would say another significant driver for the sustainable investment is the large investment funds like BlackRock, the sovereign wealth funds of the world. I would say the largest pension funds of the world, even the multilateral agencies, the ADB, World Bank. Clearly, I think most of them have stopped any kind of funding for coal, and many of them are demanding from their investee companies that they do have a very solid business plan to achieve net zero latest by 2050. So clearly we see there is a huge push from the investment, the financial community across the spectrum to kind of switch towards sustainability targets. And that plays a big role apart from the stimulus money we see from the government, central banks themselves. In fact, I'm sure all of you might have read the recent the kind of backlash from the shareholders against Chevron and ExxonMobil, who probably were the most, I would say, or the least green oil and gas providers in that sense, because they, some of them were climate deniers for a while, and then eventually they turned around, and we see all of them, both of them basically developing and announcing plans for their low carbon business. So I think that's a big move, I would say, from the time 10 years back. Can we move on, please, to the next slide? Okay. I think looking at the other aspects of the energy and power industry, I think the battery industry, battery energy storage, again, is very resilient. We are expecting about 20% growth this year. There are other parts of the, I would say, industry, especially about, I think about a decade ago, there's a huge surge of investments in smart meters, which kind of continued till 2017, 2018 globally. Then we saw a kind of decline. We believe, I think the smart meter momentum will come back for those regions which are still not covered. But probably I think that investment is slowing down this year. The other interesting aspect about the whole energy transition we see is as we move more towards distributed energy, more, I would say, small scale green energy, the question which gets asked is, are we going to see more investment into the grid, especially on the transmission side? I think the answer is yes and no, depending on which part of the world are you in. If you're in a region where the grid connectivity is still not 100% and there's more work to be done, we may tend to believe that a grid extension may not happen, and then we may go to, I would say, distributed renewable. But in those markets like the US, where there is an extensive grid network, we believe there will also have to be investments into the digital grids in a large scale to basically leverage on many of the digital aspects of technologies and also the storage and the renewable. Because currently, clearly, there is a mismatch between the places with abundant renewables and the places of consumption or loads. So we're going to see that investment happening parallelly for both generation and T&D in large markets before we completely switch to the kind of generation-led growth. So can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, maybe in interest of time, I'll kind of accelerate. So the theme here, again, this slide, what we'd kind of like to convey is traditionally companies are focused on certain energy efficiency measures in their own premises, in their own control. But clearly, I think with significant push towards both Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions, we are seeing the entire supply chain kind of getting the attention that is required. And most of the large organizations have targets and have kind of specific SDG mandates for their suppliers all the way down to the kind of the last mile. So what we see is, and this is a trend which will take time to permeate through the system, but we believe, I think that's what will drive the eventual circular economy and the whole supply chain transformation. And I think two things are kind of helping this in a way. One is the COVID and the US-China trade wars has clearly started large companies to rethink their supply chain strategies and diversify it to other countries. And Southeast Asia is clearly benefiting from that, especially countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, I would say in phase 1, and probably Indonesia and Philippines in phase 2. Are kind of gaining investments because of this whole supply chain shift. Even we see Chinese companies coming here and setting their kind of supply chain own network. So clearly, I think this region is benefiting. And number two is, I would say, especially the European Union's the recent carbon management tax announcement clearly means that I think whether you're procuring from within the EU network or outside, the companies have to pay the differential carbon tax if they are procuring from a region with a lax regulation. So a lot of those loopholes are getting plugged. And that's where we see this, the whole supply chain transformation will happen. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so here what we are basically saying is this SDGs is not just limited to the energy industry or the transport industry or the mobility industry or oil and gas to that extent. We clearly see opportunities and initiatives and targets, ambitious target in some cases, across industry sectors, whether it's aerospace, defense industry, agriculture industry, chemicals industry. So we see the sustainability, circular economy, net zero, digitalization initiatives cutting across these sectors. Can we move to the next slide, please? Now, kind of looking at the water sector. So traditionally, when we talk about utilities, I think three things come to mind. The number one is the telecom. Number two is power, and the number three is water. And the adoption of technologies also have been in that same, I would say, sequence. Telcos are probably 5 to 7 years ahead of power utilities in terms of digital and tech adoption. And we believe the water industry is about 5 years behind the power industry. But clearly what's happening now is with a higher level of consumer awareness and demand from consumers for certain types of solutions. We see that that gap could be closing, and I think that probably digitalization and availability of multi-use technologies like sensors, for example, are pushing the water industries also towards a much more sustainable and resilient, I would say, operations. And clearly, the other big trend I'm sure all of us are seeing in our own cities is the extreme climate events. Even in the last 2 months, we've seen flooding, typhoons, fires, all pretty much at the same time in different parts of the world. Mm-hmm. And the kind of incidence of the kind of frequency of these incidences are growing, which obviously means that I think that the water utilities are the ones who are, when I say water utilities, not just the water treatment plants, but the entire water industry have to really manage either flooding or drought in combination with the city authorities and I think the municipal authorities. So clearly we see the digital, the kind of zero liquid discharge from industries. I would say desalination as an option for fresh water, and the whole resource recovery, net zero, all these kind of coming together and then pushing this whole livable city, safe city, smart city, I think whatever name you want to use, is becoming an important part of that movement, I would say. Can we move on, please? Okay, next we come to the buildings. As you see here, before COVID, while some countries and some forward-looking developers were adapting digital, but generally I would say there was awareness about green building for sure, no doubt, marks in many countries, but the digital was very patchy. But clearly the COVID has pushed people, one is to work from home, or remote working has become a norm. And number two is the way we used to access and I would say utilize the buildings has completely changed now. I think there is more need for better access control, better, I would say, social distancing. Even I would say the lot of technologies which have kind of accelerated in the last 1 year, whether we're talking about the types of paints, antimicrobial paints, we're talking about, I would say, video analytics-based access control, touch-free toilets. A lot of these technologies have kind of compressed in terms of the timeline that they would normally taken. Indoor air quality is another important aspect, I think, which is always recognized as a problem, but never given enough attention that it should have. But COVID has kind of really pushed the building industry to kind of really start monitoring and managing the indoor air quality for pathogens, for bacteria, and even for the carbon monoxide levels, which were a big problem even for COVID. And I think the kind of adoption of digital twins, especially on smart building platforms, has kind of exploded. And that you can clearly see by the way the stock market price of a lot of the big tech companies has kind of exploded in the last 1 year. Can you move on? Maybe I have some more details in the next few slides. We can. Yeah. So you see here an estimate of adoption of AI in artificial intelligence, for example, in homes and buildings. And again, AI is not just about, I would say, predicting things, not just about having a fancy tool, but it's clearly a major driver for sustainability. Because you look at it on the right side, whether it's in terms of predictive maintenance, in terms of energy monitoring at home or offices, in terms of enabling demand response for utilities and the users, lighting controls, building performance optimization. So clearly, I think we are seeing AI used in a way it's going to be a significant enabler of meeting the net zero emissions in many sectors, and predominantly buildings, because buildings are the largest consumers of primary energy in the world. So you see some numbers here. We're seeing, for example, the market for AI-enabled devices and services in homes and buildings, moving from about $600 million in 2019 to about $9 billion in 2030. So that kind of represents 27% compound growth rate. And here again, you see on the right side the kind of value generated by AI at the customer end. So it moves from 6 billion in 2020 to 20 billion in 2025. So this includes your productivity, comfort, carbon savings, energy savings. So clearly, AI here is a huge enabler for sustainable buildings and smart buildings. Can we move on, please? Okay, so maybe I'll skip because we did cover some of these, especially in terms of crowd control, remote monitoring, energy management. So yeah, so we'll move here. So okay, everybody gets excited with the digital twin, but also when we talk to the maintenance managers and IT managers, they are concerned about the cost and the eventual return on investment. So it's not about having a fancy tool. Can you really recoup the investment that you made on a technology like this? Right? It is expensive. So that's where I think the whole thought process is changing now to move something called a dynamic digital twin. So it's and you see here the evolution from the AEC stands for architecture, engineering, construction. So the typical the building industry value chain. So we started with CAD, then BIM got added to that technology. Then we saw BIM plus digital twin, which is the current kind of technology was we see. And the future, we're moving towards something called BIM plus digital twin plus smart building platform. So here, I think in a nutshell, what this means is it's not about construction, it's not about operation, it's about all the way from design, engineering, procurement, construction, site management, operation maintenance, and demolition, the end of life. So clearly, the digital twin and the physical asset will grow and gradually evolve in tandem, kind of enabling two-way flow. I think in the past, when we said digital twin, it was always from physical to digital. I think now there's going to be a fair bit of two-way transfer of data, information, and eventually decision making. I think that's where the AI comes into play. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so some of the sub-trends, I did probably mention a few of these, especially in terms of contactless services or using MI and like AI and ML for even to the extent of productivity improvement, not just for comfort, but also productivity improvement. We're talking about workplace optimization and especially the hybrid working that will be enabled and facilitated by some of these technologies trends. And even what you see, the recent development of mixed use buildings, right? How do you quickly convert building, repurpose it for different applications? And we saw a lot of examples during this pandemic. A lot of countries converted like stadium into a hospital or a care center. And how you convert normal operation theater into a positive pressure operation theater. So a lot of these retrofits in the future could be much easier because you will have a living digital twin, you have a kind of technology platform to enable many of these. Can we move on, please? So the next is about electrification. So clearly, when we talk about electrification, the big focus is in terms of electrification of the transport sector. And what you see here on your screen are the kind of projections for hybrid electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and also the battery electric vehicle. So I think still I would say while Europe is leading in terms of policy initiatives and technology, clearly by sheer numbers, if we take into account all kind of electric mobility devices, then it's China which leads the way. Of course, there are concerns about the battery, especially the disposal of batteries and kind of the waste that could potentially be generated by these electric vehicles and mobility devices. So obviously, many of the regulations and policies eventually have to address the life cycle. So that is going to be another big theme you will see when we talk about sustainability. It's not just about electrification, It's also about the whole end. Can we move on, please? Okay, so well, I think when we see electrification, obviously it's not just about transport or mobility. I think also we have a lot of, I would say, industry segments and sub-segments which are very, very fossil heavy, have heavy dependence on fossil, especially talk about the oil and gas industry. While the oil and gas industry itself is, of course, the primary producer of fossil fuels, but we also see they use a lot of gas and, of course, coal if you're talking about the mining industry. So clearly now there are initiatives and targets which these companies are setting to electrify many of those processes. And when we say electrify, not just electricity using gas, but to kind of clean electricity as a source for many of the, I would say, offshore and onshore facilities. So we see, I think, Norway probably taking lead for targeting 70% planned emissions from the Norwegian continental shelf by 2040. So I think they are trying to kind of completely transform the oil and gas production. Eventually, a lot of these facilities will also move towards hydrogen and carbon capture storage. So I think we are going to see the next phase, which will evolve with a certain level of low carbon alternative fuels. And the switch now happening is actually good because we are moving ahead of the time in terms of many of these production technologies and production loads. Can we move on? Yeah. So the last big theme we see is in terms of operational expenditure-based models. So what this means is basically the asset owners do not necessarily invest upfront in any major retrofits, and the equipment is being offered as a service. For example, Emerson, which is a large automation and equipment manufacturer, so they started offering valve as a service. I think these are all things which are probably not heard of in the industry a few years ago. So we're seeing even the traditional engineering companies moving towards as a service model, Uberization of the engineering industry. And I think the pinnacle is what we call energy as a service. Schneider Electric, one of the large power engineering energy management companies. So what they're doing is they're kind of offering an energy as a service platform. Basically, they do collaborate or kind of tie up with some of the large investment banks and financial companies to offer, say, microgrid as a service or to offer energy retrofits as a service so that the clients, it could be airports, it could be shopping malls, could be university campus, etc. They don't need to upfront invest in these equipment, but these are offered as a service based on certain performance metrics. So you see there could be a combination of what a lot of types of contracts and business models, what you see on the screen here. And that's, again, driving the energy efficiency and sustainability, because now you're able to offer a much superior clean and green technology at a fraction of the investment what these end users would have to make otherwise, and they may not have made that on their own. So that's why I think the financing, the business models are very critical for the sustainability goals to be achieved. Can we move on, please? Okay, so what are the factors driving the OPEX-based business models? The fluctuating energy prices, and then especially reducing asset downtime, limited budgets. I think clearly that's the main driver. Minimizing operational risk, because you're not depending on the experts to install and operate certain retrofits. So clearly they know what they're doing, and it's kind of helped the end customers. And also I think customers are able to outsource to kind of leverage the expertise of service companies, which they don't necessarily need to have in-house. It's expensive to build those capabilities in-house, and we not even have the necessary manpower to do that. So that kind of is helping companies to tap on the expertise without really having them in-house. Can we move on, please? Yeah. So in summary, basically, what we see is clearly renewable energy has remained resilient, and when we expect a significant bumper year this year in 2021. And sustainability is clearly seen as a genuine business opportunity and not just as an environmental commitment. and role of technology is accelerating and enabling the sustainability goals to be achieved. And I would say COVID is continuing to shape the market opportunities, especially in the as a service market in the years ahead. I think, can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah. So it's about Frost, quick one about Frost & Sullivan. We are a 60-year-old company providing growth pipeline as a service. End of the day, I think we help our clients grow and achieve best-in-class performance. Can we move on, please? Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah. So you may want to kind of note this link so you can take a free diagnostic about your company, which will help you to do an automated solution to benchmark yourself against some of the other industry peers. So this is purely an online diagnostic tool, but we're happy to help you further. I think once you have had a chance to do this. So with that, I think if you can go to the last slide, I guess, please. Yeah, next one. Yeah, thank you again. We'll be happy to join the Q&A panel for answering any further questions. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Gary.
Yep. Thank you so much, Mr. Ravi. And once again, it's been a pleasure to listen to actually all four of our panelists today, but only three of them are available to be with us for the Q&A session. Thank you very much for your questions. We've had some interesting questions come in so far. Once again, if you would like to pose a question, kindly use the question box in your iGEM page. And if you don't find that question box, just reload the page and you should be able to see the question box reappear. Just to note, we've had panelists from the UNDP, an international agency. We've got Ponas Lisa from our own Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Center. Mr. Ravi, of course, is from Frost & Sullivan. We've had Prof. Carl with us from academia and indeed his very detailed work on building energy use and ensuring thermal comfort in buildings. The questions we've received fall broadly into, I guess, three broad areas. The first deals with putting a price on carbon and perhaps some of the different ways to do that, including, of course, the carbon tax. I'll save that question for later. I'd like to get one of the more sort of methodological issues, questions on methodology issue out of the way first. And I would think that this question is best suited to Ponas Lisa, but anyone can come in after that. The question is essentially, how does the government monitor the CO2 emissions by sectors and service providers for service providers who has the capability? In other words, it may be a question that actually begins with a methodological issue, but then moves into the question of what kinds of service providers might be able to provide this service. Would you be able to field this question, Ponas Lisa? Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gary. So in terms of how government is monitoring the CO2 by sectors and for service providers, yeah, because I think we are all aware that we have the BOR report and all that. So we are continuously, we have the under CASA together with all the relevant department like Department of Agriculture, and then we have CATSA together with us. So I think they are collecting all the data through all the relevant institution or from the relevant institution. Yeah. So from there, we are monitoring progressively in terms of the carbon emission. Yeah. So this, and then we always have a committee who will also verify in terms of the findings and also the report that we are going to provide, especially at the international level. Yeah. So I think that is my answer right now. Maybe others can also support that. So, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps if I can also chime in. Yeah. So regarding what Puan Hafiza mentioned about the reports being, reports at the national level that Malaysia has submitted, all these reports are publicly available on the UNFCCC's website, and there is a 4-year lag, so data is also around 4 years old. And it's really data by sector. So looking at the energy sector and the agriculture, forestry, land use, industrial processes and waste. And basically what this gives us is a snapshot of where we are in terms of meeting our climate commitments or our Paris Agreement commitments. But at the same time, I mean, that those reports, the biennial update report and the national communications, they are national reports that Malaysia submits. At the same time, there are also city-level greenhouse gas reporting that I believe quite a number of our Malaysian cities have already undertaken. So they've done their own GHG inventories that can help to pinpoint where some of the major sources of emissions are, and also where they would eventually focus their mitigation solutions and plan them so that they meet this kind of like this gap. And I also understand that private sector also does their own GHG inventory, and that's a voluntary basis. So there are a couple of different scales of inventories that we as a country collectively produce, which may not directly fit into each other, but collectively gives us a sense of where we are in this whole journey of addressing climate change.
Thank you, Nasha. If there's nothing from Mr. Ravi for now, we can actually move on to the next question. And this is actually a bit of a cluster of questions. That first question, by the way, was from Mr. Anandan Ehamram, who is the director for I think it's Renewcell from Niram Berhad. This next question is also from him, but I think this question could be answered together with a question from engineer Shamila Jayabala, who is the head of I think it's financial management FM for Hong Leong Bank Berhad. But this question is part of a broader suite of questions surrounding effectiveness of implementation and effectiveness of how we're actually getting things done. For example, we have perhaps a less than perfect level of implementation to address issues like public transport, to address issues like the use of plastics. Perhaps in the areas of land use change, we still have some areas where there appear to be competing policies and actions. And then also in the area of circular economy. So I think this could be a question that could be directed at any of the panelists. I think the question could be rephrased as, what are the challenges that you see, the biggest challenges that you see facing this need to pivot, this need to transition toward more sustainable practices, whether they be in the energy sector or in the circular economy, etc. And what is your view of a possible solution set that might be applied to this? If I might, may I direct this question to Mr. Ravi first?
Sure. Thank you, Gary, and thanks for the participant to ask the question. If we talk about, I think, if I understand correctly, the question is about the challenges in adoption, right, of renewable and circular economy practices. Mm-hmm. See, always when the adoption curve is in the early stage, there has to be some government incentive or support for companies to adapt these, right? And at that stage, I think the punitive actions there may not help clearly. So it has to be more of a carrot than a stick. Mm-hmm. But as the technologies mature and as I would say the adoption rate grows and the cost comes down, then probably the punitive actions might start yielding some result. And case in point is carbon tax. Even Singapore has got a carbon tax of I think $5. So but that basically doesn't mean anything. I think companies who want to who are still having the process will still do it. But whereas if the low carbon technologies are helping them with one of these things, either in terms of a much larger cost savings, right, efficiency improvement, or even I would say there's a big push from their own customers to go green, to grow sustainable, then I think they're going to be more worried. And especially with today's social media, right? And I think the kind of awareness from the Gen Y and Gen Z, I think those factors which are going to be really accelerating adoption in many of these cases. And I think that's the reason, if you remember, I mentioned about the whole financing aspect, right? So now we don't necessarily need to wait for a government incentive or a support mechanism for a technology to be viable. Now with I would say, yes, I think that is important for large projects. But when we talk about some of the smaller initiatives at a SME level, for example, there I think has to be encouragement to develop an ecosystem, including the financial stakeholders. So there are new business models which emerge and make the whole process more viable than just say depend on the government support, because the government support only can go so much. I think it's very difficult to sustain it. Yes, initially, yes, but not in the long run. So the encouragement by the industry associations, even by, I would say, the government, should be to kind of create that value chain and ecosystem so that it becomes more self-sustainable. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ravi. I'm glad you mentioned the financial incentives, but I was going to come back around to that later when we talked about some of the issues surrounding green investment, green loans, sustainable loans, and that. But that's fine, I think, for now. Can we go to Nasha for her answer on this?
Yeah, sure. I think I'd like to come in terms of, how effective is the circular economy in Malaysia, what could be some of the challenges and also solutions. And I think in general, the circular economy, it's more than just recycling or reusing. It's also about how to make our system as a whole much more efficient, reducing waste and minimizing the consumption of material use. So I would say that there's actions that companies can take or organizations can take that are actually low cost or could be negative cost savings, for example. And that's usually along the lines of improving energy efficiency, but then also looking at using perhaps less material to produce the same product. I think Ravi also mentioned that one of the barriers that exists could be, the economic incentives or incentives by the government policy. And I think the government really plays a very strong role, especially to get, the laggards moving or, to also to incentivize the first movers. Because I think that the transition to circular economy requires strong government policy and incentives. Incentives, for example, like the use of secondary or recycled material or taxing unsustainable alternatives, for example, like plastic packaging. But I think that overall, just looking at it from a point of view of a circular economy as an opportunity for business innovation, I think given the absence of economic incentives by the government, I think that should be the way to go, and also looking at perhaps lifestyle changes. So a couple of different, different solutions that we can employ. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nasha. Can we have your take on this, Puan Hazliza?
Thank you, Dr. Gary. So I think in terms of circular economy, I think government is now quite aggressive in terms of promoting this circular economy initiative. For CASA, we are more focusing on the plastic. So we are finalizing the single-use plastic roadmap. So other than that, we are also emphasizing on the EPR or extended producer responsibility. In terms of the incentive that we have right now, we have the green investment tax allowance, which have been started way back in 2014. So under waste management, one of the list of qualifying activities under waste management is for companies which undertake or invest in waste recycling or waste recovery or waste treatment and additional activities such as composting or store or collection or disposal. So these are some of the incentive that we have. And then previously, yes, we had the Green Technology Financing Scheme, and now we have a new scheme for GTFS for Sukuk. So that is also something that available right now. And then I think these are the opportunities that for companies who like to, for also for the green investment tax, ITE, for those service companies, there are also incentive in terms of the tax exemption for new companies that are involved in the green technology initiative or green technology services. So that one you can also look at you can also contact us if you are interested or want to know more about the incentive that are available. So I think that is what I have right now, Dr. Gary.
Yeah, thank you so much, Puan Hasliza. I think we clearly see that apart from these major government programs, we also see that the private sector is very much rising to the challenges from a technological and from a commercial standpoint as well. I was very surprised to see now that you can buy your sticky tape, your scotch tape, and it's biodegradable because it's made from cellulose. And nowadays even pens, plastic pens, are completely made of cellulose, so you can actually put them in your compost and they will disappear. But before I let you go, I did want to put you on the spot a little bit, because we do have a question on land use, and I need to qualify this ahead of time. Of course, MGTC is under KASA, Kementerian Alam Sekitar and Air, the Environment and Water Ministry, and forests are actually under the purview of the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources, or KETSA. But we do have a question about de-gazettement or re-gazettement of green lungs, the name of development. And perhaps if I could ask you to perhaps elaborate a little bit on some of the responses to that particular event or that particular development. I understand you cannot get into details, but if you would perhaps address some of the issues surrounding it. One.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Gary. So about the land matters or land use, it is under the jurisdiction of state government. However, there are constant or continuous dialogue and also communication or meetings and discussion between federal and also state governments. And to look at to make sure that they adhere and adopt the policies. And then we also have a continuous and ongoing process that require in terms of awareness, and action at all levels. And then at MGTC, as I presented earlier, we are implementing the low carbon cities program. So we promote the redevelopment of brownfield land, either to increase the density or create a mixed development to refurbish all parts of the city. So these are some of the options that cities have in order to balance in terms of economic growth and also to maintain or to ensure the social aspect. And then how about the efforts towards LCC? So we are quite aggressive now in promoting the low carbon cities program. In terms of we can see that there are quite a number of PBTs are now quite active in terms of implementing their low carbon cities initiatives. Yeah. So we also keep on increasing the awareness among the local authorities, for example, and then we also have several programs, and also we also have like training, and also we have LCC clinic, which is a continuously that we are organizing it throughout the year. And also we have also Geran Pemangkin Bandar Rendah Karbon, or GERAK. This is also to kickstart for some PBTs that have not implemented anything, but at least now with the grant that provided by the government, so they can start something with the low carbon initiatives. Yeah, so these are the continuous effort that we are doing together with CASA, our ministry. Yeah, so in terms of effectiveness, we are also like managing it, and we are trying to gauge in terms of the acceptance, the involvement of the PBTs, especially towards this initiative. And then, talking about the public transport and all that, so awareness is still lacking. Yeah, so that's why we need to have more awareness program to create more awareness among the society, among the community on these low carbon initiatives. Yeah, in terms of for single-use plastic, as I mentioned earlier, that we are also finalizing the roadmap that we hope that we can launch soon, maybe somewhere in October. Yeah, so there are a lot of action plans that we are going to, maybe we can also create awareness and also more programs towards reducing the single-use plastic. Okay, that's all. Gary.
Thank you so much, Puan. I'd like to move. So you mentioned these government support programs. In a way, it's a good segue into the next part of the Q&A, perhaps another area that was strongly explained by Mr. Ravi, and that is the area for the private sector and business. And Mr. Ravi mentioned that we see that sovereign wealth funds, I think the most recent announcement was Temasek, actually indicating that they will only be investing in green economic activities. I think you also mentioned BlackRock as manager, fund manager, and I think other managers. I think Engineer Shamila was also, I think, is a fund manager for Hong Leong Bank, but. For all these signals that we're getting from the private sector, how effective do you think these signals are? What is your estimate on the level of take up? I know, Mr. Ravi, you mentioned that there's very healthy growth in the area of sustainability and sustainability-led industries, and also environmentally friendly and climate friendly industries, but. In your assessment, perhaps, where is Malaysia in this? Do the signals, are the signals that are coming out from Bank Negara Malaysia as a regulator, from JC3 as a group, perhaps also from entities like Bursa Malaysia and the Suruhanjaya, the other regulator for stocks. How advanced are we, and how is the private sector responding to this? May I open the floor to Mr. Ravi first?
Thanks, Dr. Gary. I think my esteemed co-panelists are probably more qualified to talk about Malaysia. But what I would say in general is, when from a regional perspective, clearly I think Singapore leads the kind of, at least the green bond initiatives or many of these large financing deals does happen through Singapore because it's a natural finance hub, right? But I would say compared to, I think, previously, clearly, I think Malaysia is also making some right moves in that direction, right? Whether it's in terms of, I think some of the schemes which one Haslisa mentioned, or I would say that some of the large cornerstone projects from a green building or renewable energy standpoint. I think recently TNB signed 500 megawatt worth of PPAs for solar energy, and also with cross-border, I would say, trade being encouraged between Singapore and Malaysia for renewable purchase. I think so. Some of these are going to be stimulants initially, right? And as this picks up clearly, I think that we believe there is more momentum which will build up in the markets both in Malaysia and beyond. So I would say yes, I think so. The regions, the countries and regions do obviously have various levels of improvement, but I think Malaysia obviously will start following the global and the regional trend pretty closely also.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ravi. What about you, Nasha? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I think, I mean, from a Malaysia point of view, we do have some good signals coming out. I think first of all, like with the Bursa Malaysia Sustainability Reporting Framework, I think public listed companies are required to produce sustainability statement or sustainability reports that look at what are their ESG risks, and I think ESG is definitely a big area that kind of drives the private sector involvement in sustainability as a whole, looking at the whole governance of ESG. And like you mentioned, Dr. Gary, I think Bank Negara Malaysia, earlier this year, they issued this climate change principle-based taxonomy guidance document, which I think is a good step in terms of allowing financial institutions to assess and classify economic activities that contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation. So there's definitely a lot of good signals coming out for the private sector to head in a more sustainable direction. And I think the order of the day will be ESG and climate change. And I think there was also a question just now, I think about carbon tax. And I know that Malaysia has been mulling over the use of carbon tax or economic pricing instrument for climate change. And I think I just want to say that, if we look at, I think to get us where we need to go, we will need to have the use of some of these economic pricing instruments to factor in the invisible costs of climate change and pollution. But whether or not we are ready to go there, I think it's an issue of how do we build industry readiness. And I think that needs, really dedicated groundwork to get the industries ready in that direction. But it's also an issue about leadership and commitment. And that's something that, I think looking at all the carbon tax that has been implemented in the world, leadership and commitment would definitely be a key role. Especially if there are critics to a carbon tax mechanism. It's about how do we deal with such challenges on an effective manner.
Yeah. Thank you so very much, Nasha. What about you, Puan Haslisa? Anything to add to this in this area?
Yeah, I think from this we can see that the initiatives can be done together, either from government, the private sectors, and also our individual. So I think we have to work together towards the sustainability. Yeah.
Thank you very much. There are actually no further questions from the floor per se, but I think that we probably would not be complete if we didn't look into the effect that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on this transition to low carbon, or this transition to a more sustainable economy and as well as lifestyle and resource management. So perhaps what I'd like to do now is sort of combine this question with seeing as there are no further questions, any closing remarks, any takeaway points that you'd like to end with? So perhaps the way to phrase it would be, what do you see from the response to the COVID-19 pandemic? In your opinion, what should stay after COVID is over or becomes endemic? And what should we perhaps not keep out of this pandemic that we've actually shown that the society is actually fairly able to adapt and fairly quickly adapt. So, with the changes in mobility, with the work from home, with moving to e-commerce, I think we've seen a lot of areas where society has pivoted very quickly. In some cases for the better, in some cases perhaps not. But I'd like to know from you where you see which areas probably we should keep, and which areas we should say that, well, this was needed for COVID-19, but for whatever reason it should not be continued, and then perhaps then go on to your closing remarks. Can we begin with Nasha, if that's all right?
Yeah, sure. So I think what we can learn from the COVID-19 pandemic as to how we effectively, promote or advocate for sustainability or climate action in cities. I think the first thing would be the use of data for decision making. I think, with COVID, we have a lot of data at our fingertips that once used effectively can help to save lives and can help to, promote a quicker decision making for all parties. And so that's something that learning from the way that governments across the world have dealt with science-based, evidence-based big data to inform the way that decisions are taken. I definitely think that working from home would be, or flexible working arrangements would be a long-term thing. It should be a long-term thing in terms of helping us to manage transport emissions. And I think one thing that I personally realized during the COVID lockdown is that we as individuals can live with a lot less things. And I think minimalism is something that I have been trying to learn during this whole COVID crisis, which I believe will benefit us tremendously in terms of adopting a low carbon lifestyle. In terms of what we should not keep, I definitely think that the culture of convenience and the use of plastics during this pandemic has really gone over the roof. When we order food delivery and when we go out to Tapao and all that, we use a lot of plastics. And I think we would need to learn how to live with using less plastic and perhaps using another alternative. And I think maybe if I can wrap up my closing remarks just by saying that how we plan for our city in the future and how we prepare for our cities is really very decisive. All the issues that we're facing, energy system issues, transport, waste management, recycling, it's not something that we can tackle on its own. And it's not something that can be solved by a market economy that's just left to run on its own. And I think when we talk about sustainable cities or low carbon cities, we need to really look at beyond certain sectors and move further away from a compartmentalized thinking, which can lead to fragmented policy making. So I think using a systems thinking perspective would be a good way of making full use of the trends, that energy and environment trends that are upcoming, like Ravi mentioned just now, and help us to identify certain levels or costs and also deliver benefits to the full. So I'm definitely one for interconnected, decision making, systemic thinking, and I think that's what we will all stand to benefit from.
Thank you so much, Nasha. Can I have you go next, Lisa?
Okay. So I think from this COVID-19 pandemic, we learned a lot. Yeah, as Nasha mentioned, in terms of we are working from home, we have meeting online, we have webinar online. So I think this can be continuously be done, and we can see that from this webinar, a lot of people from outside the countries also can listen, and also they can learn from the program, right? And then this is something that we can reduce in terms of our carbon emission for our transportation, and then but we also have to make sure that we are also use our energy wisely. So that is something that we also need to be aware, because we are working from home. So how we can use our energy efficiently, and then like Nasha mentioned about the waste to reduce in terms of the single-use plastic. So if let's say we are going to tapao, so we can bring our own container and all that. So there are a lot of things that for me that people can learn and people can improve from time to time in order for us to support our low carbon cities program. So and then in terms of businesses, there are also a lot of businesses that we can see that booming during this pandemic as well, right? And then I think in terms of because I talked a lot of low carbon cities initiatives, so in the process of transitioning our cities towards low carbon, it needs a concerted effort together. We need all the stakeholders together, be it an individual, the businesses or industries, as well as the government. So it is a collective effort to ensure that our cities will be low carbon and sustainable. So that is also for our future generation. I think that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Panasliza. And finally, of course, Mr. Ravi Krishnaswamy, would you be kind enough to address the issue of COVID-19 as well as provide your closing remarks?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Gary. I think as a last comment, it's very difficult for me to tell anything. So, but what I would say, what do we keep? I think clearly in the last 1 year, we all learned to be much more hygienic than before, right? I think the general incidence of flu has come down in the world because everybody's washing their hands more frequently and wearing masks. So maybe we should continue some of those hygiene practices, which probably we should not let go. The second one is the benefits which you reap through digitalization. So I wouldn't just say about the working from home. I think it could kind of cut across a lot of things which Nasha and Panasliza mentioned. I think whether it's the kind of e-commerce or whether it's work from home. I think a lot of those things, and that could probably be multiplied. Even the school, virtual schooling, which I think many kids have got used to. So I think those things we should continue to build on as appropriate. Maybe not in the same fashion as we see today. There is opportunity for us to kind of really use the technology and bridge the gap, which I think brings me to the next point, what we should not keep. I think clearly what COVID has done is to accelerate the inequality, if you will. See, all of us are very fortunate enough to be having access to technology and kind of meeting virtually. And we have done this, I don't know, hundreds of times in the last year plus. But I think what also COVID has brought forward is kind of inequality. A lot of people who are in the low end of the economic strata, I think they're pushed down. Really, I think the people, those livelihoods are lost and their kids can't go to school or they don't have access to mobile phones or technology to kind of do virtual schooling. So I think some of that, and even vaccines, for example, right? I think so now apparently the rich countries will have surplus vaccines. And the big part of Africa would not even had 10% covered. So I think so those inequalities have clearly to be addressed, and this kind of has laid bare that. So how do we address those issues? And clearly sustainability will form a big part of all those discussions, I would say. That's my closing remark. Thank you.
May I press you for one final thing? I mean, you mentioned that things should be applied as appropriate. Definitely, of course, we're working so much with data and so much with connectivity these days. I was informed that actually it's getting to the point that because of our as it were, addiction to instantaneous communications, that one of the largest energy consumers that's grown is actually data centers and the telecommunications, and that's and we're talking approaching 10% of the grid power. So,
it was 6%, I think, a few years back.
A few years back, yes. So if you have any views on that.
So I think there are clearly one good thing is all the big internet data companies, your Amazons, Googles, I would say Apples and Tencents and everybody, Alibaba. So all of them are, I would say, in the forefront of addressing the sustainability issue, because they know for sure that I think they are some of the world's largest consumers of energy as a single industry, and even some large companies, and they have such an outsized influence on what happens in their value chain. I think today we've been talking about subsea data centers, right? So I think UK, Microsoft has experimented, I think, off the shores of UK or Europe somewhere. So clearly, I think that's a way forward. So you're going to save so much of energy, which is currently spent to cool those data centers. You don't need to cool it; it's already under the sea, as long as it can take care of the corrosion issue. So I think the technology world will find a solution for sure. So if there is an issue which is so pressing and they're kind of convinced, I'm sure they'll find a solution.
Okay. Thank you very much, and apologies for putting you on the spot on this.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We with that we've heard from all your three. Well, actually, the four speakers today, but in the discussion, we've heard in detail from three of them, and hopefully they've addressed all the questions that you have. If you have any questions that you weren't able to submit, do submit them anyway in writing to the Secretariat. We'll try and get those answered by email. All that remains is for me to, on behalf of the Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Centre, to say a very big thank you to our speakers this morning, Ms. Nasha from UNDP, Puan Hasliza from MGTC, Prof. Dr. Karl Wagner from the Malaysian German Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and of course, Mr. Ravi Krishnaswamy from Frost & Sullivan for the extremely informative and interesting presentations that they've made today. I would like to express my appreciation too to the audience for their participation and for the questions that you've submitted. Hopefully this session you found this session beneficial. Please don't forget to join the subsequent TRAC forums in the next session, on the 22nd of September, with another topic, a separate topic, clean energy for public transportation. So with that, once again, and with a big thanks to the support team who have been supporting us from behind the scenes, and once again, the organizers, thank you very much for spending your time with us, and we'll sign off here. Thank you again, and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.